All right, guys. Let's look at some ETH action. So,
Cool.
yeah, we'll piggyback off Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin on a golden ratio multiplier. Right? Golden ratio multiplier is just a way to measure relative strength over the cycles, and that's what this purple line is trying to do. Anytime you get, and shout out to Crispy Man for putting this data together. He works tirelessly building data for us, and so he needs to get the credit where credit is due.
We just had him on like a month ago. Yeah. Yep.
So there's a couple key areas in here. There's obviously these mid-cycle corrections that come in, and then there's these, more importantly, there's the where the blow off happens, which is here and here when you touch that the red line, the 100 level. And this is again, it's just another cycle where you go from the yellow circle into the green circle, yellow circle into the green. Well, we've been in the yellow circle and it's bigger than ever before and badder than ever before. And it looks like it got rejected in the similar area and by the 70% level as it did in that first cycle. It's like somewhere between the 2016 cycle and the 2020 cycle. Somewhere between there is where we are now. We're getting rejected, retesting. It's you can't see on your screen because it's probably pixelated, but this is just starting to round out right now. It's like really small down in here, but it's just starting to curve and turn back the other way because you can see how when these things pivot, they pivot pretty quickly. They don't really waste a lot of time here. So that's what's happening right now. Is this is about to pivot back the other way, and that's basically sets the trend so that we're going to head up and hit that red line. So if I throw the price chart on here now, maybe it'll help bring it all together for Bitcoin. So here's your mid-cycle like corrective period, and in that first 2016 cycle, it was still gaining in price, but these were pretty nasty drawdowns. Those were those big 35-40% dips that you got on Bitcoin back in the day. You just don't get as much in a bull market anymore, at least in the last cycle. And this was the 2019 style corrective period, which was that deep, giant descending broadening wedge. And I think if you could just pretend like the COVID did not happen, then you would have bottomed out there and we would have actually glided up in a more regular sort of way. So you wouldn't have had such a steep decline and you would have just had a normal, like one of these.
Right.
But we didn't get that because there was those anomalies in the market globally. And so then now here we are, and we're getting some sort of a mix. Well, we have like this short sideways corrective period. And now we have another short, 6 months or 8 months corrective period that marks these little tops here. And now we're just getting ready to flip that back the other way. And it's clear that it's getting ready. And the longer that takes on the breakout, as long as the price action is positive, it's healthy and good and fine, and everything's good there. So how can we use this tool to use it for ETH? Well, I wanted to use it from this perspective. So this is still Bitcoin. I want to just show you an idea of where my head is at before we go into ETH. Notice how in 2017 we hit the pink band. And then the cycle after that, we were one band lower. So one standard deviation lower on the purple band. So then you could expect like, okay, well, if the last cycle we went one cycle lower than the previous, is it true that this cycle we're going to only hit the salmon colored band or the orange colored band? And where would that potentially be by the time we get there? Because that you can see that when we start trending up, the slope of these lines curves up as well. So you could expect that by the time that we get out there in the middle end of next year, depending on how this goes, like we could be seeing prices up where the purple band is today, but it'll only hit the orange colored band. Right. So what would that look like? Maybe that would look like it's saying here $170,000, but that's remember, that's the orange band in time. Based on where this purple band is now and drawn it horizontally. So I'm going to leave you with that for now. Bitcoin to maybe hit 170K. I don't see why that's impossible. And based on this theory that, you're going to just hit one standard deviation lower on these GRM bands. But wouldn't it be cool? Let's go take a look at how Ethereum's doing and try to apply that same logic on Ethereum. So, again, the GRM looks a little bit different here. This Bitcoin did not go this low. Remember, in 2019, Ethereum was considered an dog shit coin. It wasn't even an altcoin or a blue chip at that point. It was despised and hated 100 times more than it is today. And so it hit levels here that just you wouldn't, put the price chart on here. It hit levels here that look, these, unlike Bitcoin, Ethereum way underperformed its GRM bands here, even in the last cycle here. So it's not that it was impossible, because in this next cycle its high was almost the pink band. So like let's use that logic that Ethereum's going to hit one band lower, and we'll say it hits that purple band, and try to figure out, well, where could that be? Well, then we based on our last example, you just draw that pink line forward, because we'll assume that this is going to take enough months of time that this purple band will reach where the pink band is today. And that would have you at approximately $14,000 per ETH, which that's not that far out of the question, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the prices we speculated. And I remember it in 2019 at $80. I remember ETH at $80. Now, it didn't sit there long, but I do remember that price point of it.
Right,
it was
here.
Crazy. Yeah.
I remember it too, because I bought it on Coinbase at $81 or $82.
Yeah. I bought a little
It
bit.
was around Christmas, wasn't it?
It was, well, it wasn't long before Hex launched, because the adoption amplifier took ETH. So I remember stacking up a little bit of, I think it was more in November-ish when that happened, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was, I remember it being at $81, $80, whatever it was. So I got some nice entry at that point too.
So is that what if you were looking at a range axis, is that kind of like where you see ETH this time around? Because I know like the most bearish cases, like since the beginning, people have been talking about like 8K, 10K, which of course would, many people would think is paltry. That's a 2X off of last cycle. But 14 does kind of seem like a sweet spot. Of course, the really bullish scenarios have people calling for 20K, 25K and stuff like that. I mean, I think we can agree that we would all be like really, really happy campers if we saw those levels.
Just remember that those were impossible targets for Bitcoiners and Ethereum guys back in the day. Those kinds of numbers were, so like you're there now. You're just like those guys where it's like, oh, just imagine how, and I remember the Bitcoin parties. Like I was at I remember the sentiment of March of 2018, and altcoins were getting destroyed. But I was at this Bitcoin gathering in Denver, and it was they were electric, man, because these guys had been long-term Bitcoin believers, and everyone got freed from the system basically. And so these guys were just ecstatic. And I just remember, like, it's happened twice now in a row. Now, could it happen again? Possibly. Now, to overperform that $8,000 price target based on GRM is you have to flip that purple line of support as you did here in the previous cycle and ride it up. And right now that number is around 8,200 or something. So basically, I'm sorry, it's at 85.23. So if the ETH chart just went vertical and went to 85.23 and then you just held that as support, well, yeah, you can easily double up to 16K or whatever, to the pink band. Now how long that takes and whatnot, you got to factor that in, the time element and the bullishness of it. I think also at some point, just think about it just from an opportunity perspective. Eventually the gains in Bitcoin have been so good for so long, and it just makes sense to rotate a portion into ETH for some fast money. It just does. So like at some point, the Bitcoin gourd is going to spill off into the ETH cup. And because the opportunity will be so good, because the ratio have been just beat up for too long. And, like, people, like, what do we know about markets? Markets don't sit still. Like somebody's going to do it first, right? We've seen that with every time someone says one of the 4 RH core coins is dead, it's the one that gets the move. As soon as no one's talking about Hex, that one moves. When no one's talking about Ink, that one moves. That's just natural, right? And it makes sense because they're all connected. They're interconnected, and they're gonna all go up. So anyway, yeah, I don't see why 18 to 16K is a fair range to trade for much of the cycle. Once you get really bullish, yeah, I don't see why that is. There's already such a shortage of ETH on exchanges anyways, and new protocols pop up every day in DeFi that lock up more ETH for yield, and so I just think the opportunity there is pretty good, especially when you factor in like wrapped staked ETH paired with ETH. I mean, that's a hard thing to not want to do. You're taking your ETH and you're pairing it with more ETH with yield inside of it to get yield. So you got a yielding instrument with just regular ETH, bond them together, and you get more yield on top of that. I mean, dude, that's going to become the norm. You know, anyways, I rest my case. I think ETH's got a bright future.
I think you're dead on. Well, with the money pouring into ETH from BTC too now, I mean, we've been at this ratio for too long. I mean, it's been over 2 months since the August 4th butchering of the markets when we really went down to this level. And I mean, yeah, I mean, we're at like 0.038 with the ratio right now, which is about as low as it's been.